Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the very exciting episode 1 of the Michael Pell podcast for 2021. When I say 2021, it's the first one of any particular year. But we are interviewing interesting people each week on the podcast. And to kick us off on episode 1, we have a very interesting man sitting on my right-hand side, Tyson Silver. Welcome aboard, mate.
Good to see you, Michael.
Thanks for joining us on episode 1 of the podcast. And you've got a really interesting story, Tyson, that we will uncover and we'll talk about today. You're 32 and you're a supervisor at Rio Tinto. Talk to us a little bit about what's taken you on this journey over to Southeast Queensland. Obviously, you're from Perth. How did it all start? Take us through that.
Well, it all started accidentally, Michael. My cousin, over 15 years ago, gave me an opportunity of working on a gold mine, remote Western Australia. Mining back then was the stereotypical shovel in the hand, sleeves rolled up, footy shorts, and beers, full-strength beers after work.
Some of it still is that, Tyson.
Some of it is, but it's times have changed.
It has.
How
old were you then?
I was 18 years old.
Yep.
I was going up for 2 weeks. 15 years later, I'm still in the industry.
So out of Perth, obviously where you're from.
Yep.
So you got the opportunity to go 2 weeks on.
1 week off.
1 week back.
1 week back.
Classic kind of swing, isn't it?
Classic swing, but thankfully that changed fairly quickly to a 8 and 6.
8 on, 6 off?
Yep, so that's known as an even time roster.
Right.
And as an 18-year-old, week on, week off, I'll tell you the exact figure. I was earning $56,000 as an 18-year-old.
But that is what's that? 15 years ago.
15 years ago, yeah.
Which is solid. It gave you a solid income as a young kid, effectively.
Well, probably overpaid as a young kid, to be honest.
Yeah. And then from there, you're obviously still in mining, and we'll get to that. But that allowed you to potentially start investing. Is that right, Tice?
Spot on. I guess an 18-year-old earning those sort of dollars was exciting for myself, but most of those dollars went out the window.
On a few full-strength beers in Kalgoorlie. Was it Kalgoorlie?
No, it was just north of Kalgoorlie.
Oh, yeah.
But full-strength beers at the Claremont Hotel and Ocean Beach Hotel.
Yeah.
More importantly,
know them both fairly well.
Yep. And quite quickly, my old man sort of pulled me in and said, "Look, you don't want to be one of those, miners that in years to come have nothing to show for working away and earning quite good money."
It's a classic story, isn't it? I mean, say it like it is. They piss it up against the wall.
They do. They do. So thanks to my old man, he sort of, put a vision in my head. I went up site and sort of looked around and realised there are lots of these people that have, paying off jet skis, got their next trip to Bali, but essentially they've got no savings behind them or no
credit card debt potentially.
Credit card debt.
The jet ski might be ticked up as well.
Exactly. So nothing essentially to show for some of them even, 20, 30 years in the industry. And I guess I didn't want to be one of those people. Yeah,
excellent. Well, I suppose it's you're 15 years in, and now you're a Rio Tinto supervisor here, based out of Brisbane, aren't you?
Based out of Brisbane,
and living in the Gold Coast.
But living on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, it's a good part of the world up here, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Blue water and sunny skies.
And so, in terms of that, you can say to yourself, I mean, you're an example of the story, Tyson, where you haven't necessarily pissed it up against the wall. Of course, you've had fun and you don't mind a beer, but you've invested that. Tell us how and what you've done over the last 15 years to make sure that you've made the most of the income coming in.
Well, I was probably advised, thankfully, once again, to my my old man, is property.
Yeah.
So I was 19 at the time, and he recommended jumping on realestate.com.au and have a look.
Wow.
And at the time, I thought that was a crazy idea.
Would have been a pretty new website back 15 years ago.
It would have been a very new website. AFL.com and Fox Sports News is all I looked at, Michael.
That's right.
So jumped on realestate.com.au with my dad next to me because I wasn't that keen to do so. And we started looking at properties in the area of Perth in the southern suburbs, which I'm familiar with.
Yeah, that greater Fremantle area.
Yeah, that Fremantle, Adelaide, Melville.
Good spot.
Area between sort of Fremantle and the Canning Bridge.
Yeah, blue chip really for Perth, isn't it?
Well, at the time I would have had a very small understanding of property and whatnot. So our first home open we went to, I was on the lead. Dad was literally dragging me there.
Yeah.
I had the Ocean Beach Hotel and
you were
footy
probably
to watch.
interested in other things.
100%. And
like most 19-year-olds are.
Exactly.
Right.
So we went to a property in Melville. It was the first one we walked into. And what clicked with me, Michael, was the fact that this property obviously was going to be an investment, but I could also see myself living there.
Yep.
I was like, this actually is, it's close to Leach Highway, close to the freeway, the river's there, Fremantle. Although I didn't plan on ever living in this property.
Was the raffles going okay back then? The Raffles Hotel?
The Raffles on a Wednesday.
Another draw card.
The pizza night. You would have had a couple of Hawaiian pizzas there, no doubt, Michael.
Yeah, more than just an Hawaiian pizza. But
there you go. We won't go there. A few fish tacos, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yes, this property in Melville, my old man went guarantor.
Great.
We put an offer on the table.
Excellent.
It was somewhat daunting at the time, but looking back on it now, I think, why? Why was I scared? Or why? It's not that big of a deal, to be honest.
Yeah.
So at 19 years old, I purchased a property on Coleman Crescent in Melville.
As an investment? Or
as an investment.
You didn't do the live-in, so as an investment.
That was as an investment from day one.
That's
so that
great.
gives me the entitlements of claiming interest, claiming rates and whatnot.
And you probably, Tyson, gave you some extra responsibility, obviously, didn't it? Whilst mum and dad were there, it's you. You've got to be repaying that.
It is. So it's the responsibility. And further to that, it was forced savings.
Of course.
So interest rates back then in 2006 or thereabouts,
7%. Yeah.
So, they're at 2 now. So
yeah, they're at 2 now. Someone like you can really see the value.
Exactly. So
you were chipping in a little bit, the difference obviously between the rent coming in.
Exactly. So it was rented out. And then I would have to chip in the rest,
$200,
whatever it may have been.
Yeah.
And then over the years that accumulated, because I was paying principal and interest off this property.
You were paying it down.
Yep. And also I got it for a fairly good price.
Yep.
And before I knew it, 18 months later, there was over 100 grand of equity sitting there.
Wow.
And that then springboarded me to be able to borrow more and go again.
Wow.
And as a 22-year-old or thereabouts, bought a property in Attadale.
Had your second by 22.
Yep, in Attadale. That's a 2-bedroom townhouse.
Yep.
And I moved in and lived in that property.
Beautiful.
But essentially, the reason why I could afford that was due to what I did as a 19-year-old buying the property in Melville.
I think the big thing that you mentioned there, Tyson, and probably even more important than the property going up in value or capital growth, is the forced savings.
Exactly.
Even if the property doesn't go up, but it would. But even if it doesn't, you going 2 on, 1 off, working in the mines, paying it down, you're actually making that equity. You're paying down the loan, the rent's coming in. You're creating that, like you said, 100 grand to put into the next property.
Exactly. So forced savings also works that if I was to spend all my income and I had $0 in the bank account, I'm essentially still saving because I'm paying off.
You're paying the principal and interest
of the property off. Exactly.
I've talked about it before, and I know for myself, I'm not a great saver, but with my properties, it's you make your repayments, and that's the forced saving. I think as humans, if we don't have to make that repayment, and you've just got money coming into your bank, and you don't have to do anything, you'll go and spend it on a holiday or a new set of jeans, or spend too much.
On generally for myself, it was material goods I essentially didn't need.
So that's excellent. So by the time you were how old? You had 3 properties? You purchased 3 properties?
Well, I've got my third now, which is on the Gold Coast.
Wow. Well done. And that was a great buy too, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a good buy. So I told you that story. I got a deal there, much like the first property. But look, you've got to be in it to win it, somewhat, Michael.
It was a little old lady. The car was owned by a little old lady, one owner. It was this side was the house was owned by a little old lady, and she wanted to go back to Melbourne.
To Victoria. So she brought this off the plan in 1992 or thereabouts.
Wow.
And she's lived in Victoria for the last 15, 20 years.
Yep.
And it's time to get rid of her place on the Gold Coast, and I snapped it up for a good price.
Good price, yes. So knows how to spot a deal. So look, that's exciting. I mean, in terms of your journey, Tyson, and you obviously love property, and we'll talk about Rio Tinto. You've moved up there. You obviously spent time at BHP as well. Any mistakes that you feel that you've made along the last 15 years? Anything that you might change?
Good question, Michael.
Or would you have bought more?
Well, essentially, if the bank's willing to lend you the money, in my opinion, borrow the money and put it into property.
Yeah. It's good to hear that from someone who's not in property. It's not just us guys that say that.
Especially, well, look, in 2006, the interest rates were 7%, and I was able to pay off the loan.
Yeah.
Interest these days is at 2%.
Yeah.
So essentially, your property's most likely going to be positively geared from the get-go.
Positive cash flow.
I didn't get that in 2000, my first property.
Of course.
So
people often say as well, they ask us, and we'll talk about the 7% rates you were paying, Tyson, and I was too back in 07. When interest rates go up, it's more difficult for people to borrow money.
Yep.
So therefore, more people have to rent. So therefore, rents go up.
Exactly.
So if you're an investor and you're worried about interest rates going up over the next few years, please understand this, that rents will move with interest rates because less people can purchase due to the higher interest rates, and so rents will go up. So you're an example. You were fine during that time.
I was fine during that time, and people these days, I think, Michael, think property is overpriced, but essentially the property is not costing you as much because the interest rates are so low.
Of course.
Right.
And then the rent coming in.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I would rather be buying a property that, even though they're not, be overpriced at 2%, than buy a property that is market value but paying 7% because it's essentially costing you more to own that property.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think a big thing as well, people are always wanting to spot the right deal, but I think they actually put that over getting into the market. If you sit out for 5 years, you've lost 5 years worth of growth. Exactly. Not to mention the tax deductions that you'd get. I dare say your income's gone up a bit from 56,000 15 years ago. So you're getting good tax deductions off the properties as well, and they're sort of looking after themselves.
Absolutely. I think something that we sort of, in hindsight, look back now, and probably lots of first home buyers in the market today are probably scared or find it daunting buying a property, but looking back on it, I don't think it is going to be the biggest decision in your life. Essentially at 2%, rent it out, and you're making money on the property.
It's not as daunting.
It's not at all.
Once you've been through it.
Exactly. So that's the advice that I give to anyone
looking at it.
That asks me about my experience in property. Essentially, look, you can always sell the property. You're most likely going to be able to sell it for more than you purchased it for. And it's not actually going to cost you as much as you think with today's interest rate.
That's right. And I think if people have a long-term strategy with property, and they're buying properties in good areas, long term, they're not really going to go wrong. Yeah,
and that's a good point you make. I think that's the properties that I've purchased. I've been fortunate enough to buy in areas that I can live in. And would be happy to live in. But if it takes buying a property that's not in your ideal area, right, but it does give you that equity over time. It will give you that backbone to be able to one day afford in the area you want to live in.
That's right. People often hold out and they say, I can't buy a property in the area that I want to be in. I want to be in Bondi, or I want to be in Tenerife or New Farm in Brisbane, or I want to be in Main Beach on the front. How about taking a couple of steps back and purchasing something that you can afford, pay it down, get the rent coming in, and then in a few more years, once you've built up the equity.
There you go.
It's slow and steady. In terms of your journey, so anything you would do differently, Tyson?
It's been a long journey, obviously, 15 years. Day one was a 45-degree day with a shovel in my hand, shoveling away. And my journey's gone from that into remote operations centres. So
you're in the control centre now?
In the control centre. So mine sites generally are not controlled from the Pilbara, from the goldfields, from the Bowen Basin. They're actually controlled from a hub.
They were, though, weren't they?
They were, 100%.
Until roughly, 10, 20 years ago?
But Rio Tinto were the first to operate out of a remote operations centre in Perth. So they were controlling all their Pilbara assets from a hub near the Perth airport. And from there, the other mining players have got on board because of it reaps many benefits having a central hub for their operations. So I've slowly worked my way up over time, and I'm now in one of those operations centres. Controlling the trucks and the processing facilities and the port shipping side of things. Some important joysticks and buttons in there. Exactly. It's a bit like a Homer Simpson type job.
And so this has been a goal for you from the beginning to get to where you're at?
Well, it probably was, actually, to be honest.
But it's also evolved that way as well.
It sort of has evolved that way, but I could very, very well still be on a mine site. But I'm quite happy if I wanted to be. I'm quite happy being in the hub. We're very innovative. We're very tech savvy. We're always thinking outside the square.
They're the leaders in the space, obviously. Rio Tinto, aren't they?
They are, 100%. So it's good to be there.
Excellent. And I suppose it gives you that really strong income to continue investing. And obviously you're an avid investor.
And always looking.
Are shares apart? Do you have any shares?
I do have a small share portfolio sitting there. But ASX.com compared to real estate. I'm always looking at real estate.
Of course. It's a long, slow burn, and it's a bit more guaranteed, I think, isn't it?
It is, and also that it is that forced savings that we mentioned before. If the bank's willing to lend me the money,
You'll take it.
I'm quite happy to borrow it,
Yep.
and put it into a property somewhere.
Well, good news is in a couple of months, the banks are actually loosening their lending criteria. Have you heard that? March, April.
Right.
So they're actually, it was brought on by Josh Frydenberg, but you know how they've been really, really strict since the Royal Commission. You know, why did you order Uber Eats on the Friday night? You take your money out of the ATM on Saturday. What was that for? They're basically putting the onus a little bit back to the purchaser now and saying, hey, you're applying for this loan, you need to say that you can afford that. And it's just loosening things a little bit, which I think is a positive.
Yep.
So with all of these sort of things happening, I think the stars are aligning, and like low interest rates, low stock on the market of quality property, and basically, you know, as you say, money's so cheap, and also rental yields are quite high. There's so many investors coming back into the market right now.
Well, I think, you know, obviously we're in unforeseen times with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Pandemic going on, and that's bringing many Australians back home.
Yep.
Because essentially we've done quite well.
A lot of people have come back from overseas.
A lot of people have come back, so the stock's low, especially in places, you know, our home city, Perth.
Perth, yep. Brisbane, or Southeast Queensland.
The vacancy rates in Perth for rentals is below 1%.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Look, if you were to buy a property in, you know, today's times, you're going to be able to rent it out quite easily.
Yeah. Which is often the biggest
price.
concern of an investor. Oh my God, Michael, what if I buy this property through you? What if I can't rent it out?
Exactly. Well, my Attadale property went on the market for a new tenant recently.
Yep.
And the state of play over in Perth right now is people are actually outbidding each other to get into the property. So
yeah. There's 20, 30, 40 people rolling up for a rental application.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting times. It's never really seen before times. And I've been in property almost 20 years, but guys like Michael Matuzik and Terry Ryder and the more experienced guys have been in it for 40 years. I read all their stuff each week. They're obviously, you know, leading independent analysts of property in Australia. They're saying they've never actually seen conditions like this right now in terms of it being a perfect storm. But I think people need to still be wary. You can't just go out and buy anything. I did a video on this on the way down, on the drive down, just then in the car on the hands-free. But like, people can't just go and buy anything and think it's going to be okay. You know, there are still oversupplies of apartments in certain areas in your major capital cities. You know, you've got to be careful what you buy.
And there's you probably know a lot better than me, but it's the schools, it's the Bunnings, it's the Woolworths, it's, you know, what things do you look for?
Yeah, well, it's exactly right. So it's your infrastructure. So it's your Bunnings.
Transport.
Your bus stations, your train stations, your hospitals, your shopping centres. It's also the economic growth within the area. Are there for lease signs everywhere, or are most of the commercial spaces filled with businesses? Are there new coffee shops and new restaurants opening up? Also, the demographics of the area is important, like who's living there, how old are they, what are they earning? And is their income increasing? Because if you buy in an area where people's incomes are not increasing, they can't then upsize and, you know, people want to upgrade over time. If their income stays low, then generally in that area, property prices will remain stagnant. So there's lots of things to consider.
Yep.
Also population growth. Now, whilst we haven't had a lot of it from overseas recently, we need to think about this, is that coronavirus will be kept, when the vaccine comes, will be under control, so to speak. The internationals can come back in. What is that going to do to property prices?
Right, so essentially there's some simple due diligence that needs to be done.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the properties, you mentioned, was it Attadale?
Yep.
And Melville?
Melville, yep.
And what were they? What kinds of properties?
The Melville property is a 3-bedroom Rio Strata house.
Yep, a house.
Yep.
Oh, survey strata? Or,
yep, exactly.
Yep.
And Attadale is a 2-bedroom townhouse.
Wow. Okay, so you've got some good mix there.
Yeah. So the major difference is that the Attadale is a lock and leave as such.
Yep.
No maintenance. Good for a FIFO worker.
In and out. Perfect for a tenant.
Exactly.
They don't want a big backyard.
They don't need gardens. They don't want pools. They don't need, you know.
They don't need
all
that. Yeah. I think that's where people go wrong as well. I would only live in a place with a big backyard. We've got to actually get inside the mind of a tenant as a landlord, as an investor. Who is going to come and rent this from me for the next 12 to 24 months and pay good rent? They don't want to be mowing someone else's
So you've got to sometimes get...
I don't want to be mowing my own backyard, let alone somebody else's, Tice.
That's it. I thought you'd be a whippersnipper type of guy.
Yeah. Actually, funny story. My dad actually got a sheep once. We were living in Mosman Park. He got a sheep in the backyard. It was a big block to be our lawnmower anyway.
There you go. But it's funny you say. So I think sometimes if you're purchasing a property primary as an investment, you've got to sort of get rid of that emotional attachment and look at it as a business.
Correct.
Okay, this is sort of a money maker for me.
Yes.
It may not have the garden, or it may not have whatever
You might not
dream
even want
home
to live
wants.
there.
Exactly. You may not even ever want to live there.
But it's a money maker.
Exactly. So you've got to look at the infrastructure around the things we just mentioned in terms of doing due diligence.
Yep.
If it ticks those boxes, you're probably going to get a rental return.
That's
and
right.
that's essentially going to set you up.
Yeah, and everyone, it's like anything in life. Everyone's different. People have different tastes. So that's exactly right. As an investor, I think you really have to detach the emotion, but it's probably one of the biggest challenges we find with our clients because it's such an emotional thing. I'm spending $500,000 on a property. Hey, that's my money or my money I'm getting from the bank. I want to have a say in what I'm buying. Of course you want to have a say. It's yours, but you've still got to have that investor cap on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Tice, in terms of the properties you've bought, what has been the best performing?
The best performing would be the Melville property, the house.
Yep.
One, because of the time. It was the first one I purchased, and it was during the mining boom in Western Australia.
Yep.
And I probably purchased that under market.
Right.
So I was
Good growth.
I was ahead of the
Curve.
straight away. So
Beautiful.
hence having 150 odd grand equity sitting there after 18 months.
Yeah. And just to quickly explain to people what we're talking about with equity is that's not necessarily cash in Tyson's bank. That's the difference between the value of the property and the loan. Yeah. So the loan might have been $300, the value might have been $450.
There you go.
You can actually use that $150,000 there and go to the bank and use that as your deposit, which Tyson did, to launch him into the next property.
Spot on,
but
that's it.
Talk about that later, maybe in a different tutorial, Tice. We're going to talk a little bit about Rio Tinto and exactly sort of where you see yourself going in a second. What's next for you in terms of investing? Where are you buying soon? Are you waiting years? What are you thinking for yourself?
Always looking.
Yep.
Always on the market.
Yep.
You know, everything's
You've got a loaded gun, so to speak.
and everything's negotiable in life,
Everything's
isn't it?
Everything's
Tell
negotiable.
me one thing that's not negotiable.
Everything is negotiable. I think we negotiate all the time. I'm negotiating with my wife all the time. Even with my 1-year-old son, I'm negotiating.
Most likely, my next investment in the property space will probably be a property back in Perth for myself and my partner to live in.
Great. For the potential move back.
For the potential move back.
Can we talk about that? Can we let Rio Tinto know that yet? Are they listening?
A little bit too
Block
soon.
your ears. No. But I mean, obviously Rio Tinto is national, so...
And when I say that, I don't necessarily have to purchase it and move in tomorrow.
No.
If the right thing came up in the Bictons or the...
You'd buy it, rent it.
Exactly, and sit on it and then...
Have it ready.
Because I think now is a good time to buy.
Yep.
So I'd prefer to buy now, not miss out and put a tenant in it. Why?
think you're
Because
right.
it's so easy to get tenants in Perth right now.
Absolutely. I think you're right. Perth, our old hometown, or our hometown, and obviously Brisbane, I think have been the two major benefactors of COVID. It's really assisted.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's probably helped with the Gold Coast purchase. A lot of Sydney-siders and Melbourneites are happy to get out of these major cities right now and come to the beautiful sunshine on the Gold Coast.
Yep.
So, I've probably been fortunate in purchasing the Gold Coast property at the right time.
Yep, and good diversification for you
exactly.
too.
Having obviously property on the East Coast is great. But if you look at schools and whatnot around the Gold Coast, they're all full with people from the south wanting to get up here.
It's amazing, isn't it? I heard that. Gold Coast up into Brisbane and up to Noosa, enrolments for 2021, this school year, have been off the charts. Greatest in 20 years. So It's interesting. It's good to be a part of it, good to be up here in southeast Queensland. And look, with all due respect to your Melbournes and your Sydneys, it's nothing against them as cities. I think what's happened with COVID, Tyson, as you would well know, is that a lot of people don't have to go to the CBD to work anymore. They can work from home with their laptop, with their phone. They're remote. And my wife's a perfect case of that. We moved from Sydney and she works remotely for an international company from home in Tenerife.
There you go. And, you'd rather have your lunch break on the Gold Coast than in Melbourne, wouldn't you?
Well, that's right. So it's a big shift that we're seeing, and for investors looking now, I think they're not just necessarily looking in the capital cities, they are looking as well to coastal areas, to regional areas of Australia.
There you go. And I think I read recently that Mark McGowan's going to put a cap on regional transport or flights.
Wow.
So if you are in these regional hubs, you're not going to be paying overs to get to Perth for events, weddings, whatever you need to go to Perth for.
Okay, so it used to cost an arm and a leg to go to Broome.
Especially, and also the regional areas that are mining related.
Yep.
the mining companies would end up the price would be jacked up to cater for them.
Yeah.
And I guess little Tom and Harry or whoever want to go down and go watch the footy, they'd have to pay overs to get back.
I think you're right. I think COVID, as sad as the deaths have been, obviously, and the economic impact, I think it's like anything in life. From breakdown comes breakthrough. There have been some benefits of COVID.
There have.
And some permanent changes that society has had to make and is making. So.
And it's probably forced us to understand and use technology better than we did.
Yeah, it's got me on Zoom, I can tell you that.
There you go.
I've done more Zooms in the last 12 months than I'd ever done.
Okay.
So, and look, Tyson, before we finish up, just quickly, you've rented those properties out, the ones you rented out over in WA in Perth. Have you had good property managers? What's your experience been like with the property managers?
There's been some good ones and some not so good ones, as you'd be aware. Not everyone in property is as enthusiastic as yourself, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, mate. It's like any industry, though,
of course,
isn't it?
Of course. So, yes. So you've got to pick your property manager. I've been fortunate enough to also rent out a property without having to go through a property manager due to my relationship with the tenant.
Wow. So that's good. That's rare.
If you can get into that position, it's even better because you're not paying the however 2% a month or whatever it may be to a property manager who essentially sometimes don't have to do all that much.
Of course.
So having it done privately is a win.
Yep, it is definitely a win.
But the key thing here is tenants can actually cost you if you don't have the right tenant.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So sometimes paying the property manager, if you don't know who the tenant is a smart thing to do.
It's a little insurance policy.
Exactly.
It's tax
so
deductible.
They do the inspections, they hold them accountable, and they hold the bond.
Yep.
And if you don't know the tenants, it's best letting the professionals do that.
Agree. Well, Tyson, it's been great talking about your journey. 32 years of age, bought multiple properties. He's been in the mining game for 15 years and now supervisor at Rio Tinto. Thank you very much for joining us, mate.
Good to see you.
Episode 1.
Cheers.
Thank you.